Sometime in the middle of the night, around 4 a.m. local time, I was landing in the middle of nowhere in Georgia on what is officially called the Kutaisi International Airport, which is indeed in the same administrative region as Kutaisi but quite far from Kutaisi itself. Pretty much like the Luton Airport in England, which is sometimes called Luton London, even though there are quite a few kilometers from it to London. The first shock? There is no regular transport from the airport to the city of Kutaisi. You're on your own. Good luck. Oh, you don't speak Georgian or Russian? How cute. Well, tough luck then. But after this very, very low point, everything else improved dramatically. So, let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the second featured installment of the Hungary-Georgia-Armenia tour. So as I was saying in the intro, landing for the first time in Kutaisi is quite an experience, especially if you're tired, as I was, since I had been in a plane for most of the night or on the road in Budapest trying to catch as many landmarks as possible to include in the previous video. But if you're accustomed to Eastern Europe, your instincts will be very useful here. If not, well, you'll learn on the job. So anyway, after aggressively negotiating for about an hour with a black market cabbie, I finally got into the city center, very close to the hostel I had a reservation for. Oh, about the hostel. This is the street where the hostel was located on. Now, interpreting this depends on your biases, but look at it from the local point of view. If they don't destroy the street to change the water, electricity and gas infrastructure and then put in nice pavement, then tourists will forever say the place is crap. If they do, like they were doing when I landed here, then some people watching these images will still say it's crap. So from the Georgian point of view, it makes perfect sense to ignore the comfort of tourists like me for a few months in favor of much more comfort for both the locals and the tourists over the long run, which makes absolute sense to me. So, I got to stay in the Jewish quarter. The people who hosted me were Jews. I got to buy cigarettes from the kosher store. Not every day you get to say that. And I was very close to the local synagogue. Now, in the first day here, I was all confused. Unlike Budapest or later on Tbilisi and Yerevan, I really had no idea what to expect here, and the feeling of where the hell am I lingered on for the first day. But I also slept for most of the daytime, not just because I was tired, but also because I brutally discovered that what I called extreme heat in Budapest was a joke. In Kutaisi, 50 degrees Celsius with 85% humidity and usually a lot more is the absolute norm during summertime. Anyway, since I mentioned that I was close to the synagogue, let me show you that one first. Now, getting the okay to videotape inside was a challenge. Apparently, some fascists videotaped propaganda material here a while ago, and since then, they banned all videotaping. Well, unless you're from Romania, speak decent Russian, and you can easily prove you're not a fascist by normal, sensible human being standards. Now, this synagogue is the biggest and administratively the most important, but it's not the oldest. Technically, none are open to the visitors, but then again, most rules in this regard in Georgia can be negotiated if you're not an annoying prick. The Great Synagogue of Kutaisi was built in the 1880s, and during the Soviet times, like all other houses of worship, it was kept closed and purposefully left to decay. The local community would use a smaller and older synagogue up street from here that had escaped Soviet cataloging as a religious building for several decades, as the land had been privately owned and the Soviets assumed it was just a house. Perhaps a bit ironically, the rehabilitation of the synagogue came through private donations from a man himself accused of Soviet ties, namely David Mikhailovich Yakubachvili, a Georgian Jew who built the company JSC Wim Bill Dunn, a manufacturer of dairy products, juices, and beverages. He sold that company in 2010, but the firm is still the largest fully privately owned company in Russia. He also financed the monument in front of the synagogue depicting Boris Gabonov, who also gives the name of the street. Now, this street used to be called Shaumian Street for about 200 years until the Soviet Union happened. After the dissolution of the evil empire, the locals chose to name the street after Boris Gabonov as an homage to the fact that he translated Shota Rustaveli's The Knight in the Panther's Skin into Hebrew. Now remember this name, Shota Rustaveli. You'll hear his name appear again in the next video multiple times. From what I understood from the staff, the synagogue basically reflects the state of the community right now, which is one of reorganizing. As one member of the staff told me, come back 5 years and you won't recognize most of this part of the town, except for the interior of the synagogue, which is already finished. Now, I might take him up on that offer, since I do want to come back to Georgia either on my way to Azerbaijan or while I get back from Azerbaijan. Oh, and one fake news alert. You'll often see on the internet that this synagogue is one of the 3 synagogues in Georgia. That's actually false. There are 3 synagogues just on the Gabonov Street in Kutaisi. Just thought I'd throw that in there because the information in English about anything from Georgia is either non-existent or horribly misguided. Anyway, I mentioned Rustaveli, so let's see where Rustaveli was educated. Rustaveli lived between 1160 AD and sometimes around 1225 or so. So he had to get his education from an institution that was around back then. Well, the building of that institution is still standing, but to get there you have to hit the road because most of the nice things in Kutaisi are either somewhere on a remote hill where you have to climb a gazillion stairs or over 20 kilometers away from the city. So we hit the road and go to what is nowadays known as the Gelati Monastery, which is a misleading name since it's actually a monastic complex and it is far more than just a monastery. Sadly, I caught bad weather, so the shots from the outside are less glorious than they would have been in a normal day, or even later on in the same day, but nevertheless I tried to get some shots even as the heavy rain was threatening my equipment. So, Gelati is one of the UNESCO heritage sites in Georgia, and for good reason. Founded in 1106 by King David IV of Georgia, sometimes also known as David the Builder, Gelati was a place of spiritual and intellectual fulfillment during the Georgian Golden Age, which actually somewhat begins with this place and ends somewhere in late 13th century when, the Ottoman Empire happened. This is basically most things in Georgia. Things were great until Islam happened. Then Islam was defeated and things were getting better, and then the Soviet Union happened. The same is true with Gelati. Those contemporaneous with the height of Gelati's academic and spiritual power, both Georgian and foreign, refer to Gelati Academy as a new Hellas or the second Athos. Basically, Gelati was the de facto source of Christian civilization in medieval Georgia and was one of the few ecclesiastic institutions in the world that maintained tight relationships with Constantinople, Athos, and Rome at the same time. In the view of the scholars at Gelati, the 1054 schism was an administrative dispute, but not a civilizational dispute, and thus they continued to regard Christendom as a whole and as part of the same civilization. Important work in mathematics, physics, astronomy, and natural sciences was conducted here between the 12th and the 15th century, even long after the Georgian Golden Age was finished and the country was isolated between Islamic powers. Also, the most important manuscripts were also deposited here even long after the place no longer served as an academy. So where are the manuscripts and other artifacts? The Soviet Union happened. Mind you, it wasn't just the Soviet Union that looted the place. The Islamic Ottoman Empire raided the place several times, but most of their loot has survived and has been slowly recovered from various private collectors. But it was Soviet troops that tried to tear it down completely and also took everything they found and burned it in the backyard because, you see, religion is bad. Now, it didn't matter that most of the manuscripts in Gelati were actually not religious in nature. Good luck explaining that to the Soviets. Later on, in the 1970s, the Soviets included Gelati on their list of monuments of national significance, but that was mostly to appease Western critics who were rightfully pounding the Soviet Union for its systemic and systematic destruction of both national and world heritages that were not for the Soviet Union to dispose of. At the fall of the Soviet Union, the main building did not even have a roof, and while the paintings look bad now, they were in a much worse state of decay in 1991. To put it bluntly, if the Soviet Union had existed for 25 more years, there would not have been a Gelati complex to visit today. Everything would have collapsed entirely, and within a generation everyone would have forgotten that it existed, which was the idea in the Soviet Union right from the get-go with most of these monuments. But the future looks brighter. The renovation work for the secondary building is advancing at a decent pace. Easy and cheap transportation to this location has emerged. The road has been fixed, and the new building has also appeared at the entrance in the complex, which will serve as a museum. So after 90 years of things looking bleaker and bleaker, the tide has been turned, and for the last 9 or 10 years, things have been slowly but consistently moving in the right direction with this site. And while it appears to be moving slow, one has to remember that Rome, or Gelati for that matter, wasn't built in a day either. So we'll just have to give it time. Besides, restoring 700 to 1,000-year-old paintings isn't the kind of job that you do in a few months. Restoration of the paintings alone is a job that takes at least a decade, probably more, given that there are numerous paintings on this site that all have been affected by the decades in which the place, again, did not have a roof. The situation at Gelati contrasts to the other old church in Kutaisi, the Bagrati Cathedral, which I'll show it to you in a minute. At Gelati, the Georgian Orthodox Church, the government, and various local and international private entities are trying to play by the impossible rules of UNESCO. Many people may not know this, but in order to retain the status of World Heritage Site, you have to obey a set of rules that, on a first read, they appear to make sense. However, applying rules that were written long before anyone in the West knew what the Soviet Union was doing to World Heritage Sites is misguided, to say the least. Also, many World Heritage Sites rules were written with much more recent monuments in mind and don't really account for old civilizations like Georgia and Armenia, who might still have constructions dating from before most nations of Europe were even nations themselves to begin with. And you will see what I'm talking about with the next site. Now, the Bagrati Cathedral is basically the symbol of Kutaisi and of the whole region really, as it serves as the spiritual center of the kingdom of Imereti. The county that Kutaisi presides over today is still called Imereti. The kingdom of Imereti existed in various forms from the 1200s to the 19th century. As I said, this is an old civilization. Getting to the Bagrati Cathedral means climbing a lot of stairs. In theory, there is a bus, but it takes more to find out its schedule than to just climb the stairs. That is because the locals think it's weird to take the bus or the cab for such a short distance, so most of them don't know the public transport that goes there. Anyway, the Bagrati Cathedral was built, get this, in the early years of the 11th century during the reign of King Bagrat III. Bagrat III, part of the Georgian Bagrationi dynasty, ruled in Georgia between 1008 and 1014. On the north wall of the church, if you look hard enough, which I didn't, there is also a reference that the floor of the church was put in place in the year 1003 Anno Domini. So basically, this is a church older than the Great Schism. Well, most portions of it are, though not all of it. In 1692, Islam happened and the Ottoman Imperial Army blew it up, causing the cupola and the ceiling to completely collapse, also affecting the supporting poles. Because that's what Islam does. Blowing up the stuff built by superior civilizations did not start with ISIS. It's a very old tradition, as old as Islam itself, actually. Some attempts to reconstruct at least the ceiling were made in the 18th century, but most of that work collapsed during the early days of communism. 1 year after Stalin's death in 1954, Georgian architect Vakhtang Tsintzadze started a series of archaeological studies with the view to come up with a way to reconstruct the Bagrati Cathedral in such a way that it would take using as much of the original material as possible and making it as close as possible to what it looked like in early 11th century. But while his studies were authorized, the actual reconstruction work was never allowed during the Soviet times for the same reason work at Gelati wasn't allowed. The Soviets didn't take kindly the fact that Georgians would like to preserve their national identity, their civilizational symbols that made them distinct from Russia, and especially their religion. Vakhtang Tsintzadze died in 1993, but not before finishing his studies and coming up with a solid plan on how to make this cathedral great again. After his death, UNESCO included this cathedral in 1994 on the list of World Heritage Sites. As long as it was in an advanced state of decrepitude, it fit the criteria. But in 2010, when under the leadership of Italian architect Andrea Bruno, Georgia commenced reconstruction work aimed at returning Bagrati Cathedral to its original state as a religious space, then it suddenly no longer fit the criteria. UNESCO declared it endangered, and the International Council on Monuments and Sites said that no reconstruction should be done. But at the same time, they were decrying the poor state of the site. Basically, Georgia cannot win with these people. If it makes its sites great again, that's somehow not authentic. If it doesn't, then it's universal international criticism for not caring for its monuments. So in the end, Georgia went with the original plan of Vakhtang Tsintzadze and under the leadership of Andrea Bruno proceeded to make the symbol of Kutaisi attractive to pilgrims and tourists worldwide. Andrea Bruno was awarded the Georgian State Gold Medal, and the University of Ferrara awarded him the Domus International Prize for Restoration and Conservation. The price paid for this was for UNESCO to remove this gorgeous place from the World Heritage Site Index. Basically, UNESCO would have preferred Georgia to do to Bagrati what the Soviet Union did, namely to allow distant observance of the site but no attempt to make it better or usable or anything really. The way I saw it while being here is that the Georgians had a point and UNESCO is wrong. But please tell me in the comments, maybe I'm missing something. The city also has two museums, a local history museum and a museum of military history, although sadly the Museum of Military History doesn't include a section of medieval Georgian history. That part is only in the National Museum in Tbilisi, located on, wait for it, Rustavelli Avenue. But that one doesn't allow videotaping inside. But that's a concern for the next episode. The local history museum has quite a few artifacts, including 12th century books written in Georgian, and a modern-day Georgian can read them with a minuscule amount of trouble. That's not something you see every day. I mean, try reading a 12th century books in French, or Russian, or good heavens, English. Georgian, on the other hand, remained pretty much the same, that is to say, just as difficult. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got from Kutaisi, because the place is really just booming now. More than half of the city is a giant construction site that is progressing quite fast. For instance, by the time I came back here from Armenia, they had almost finished the Gabonov Street and were starting working on Newport Street. Oh yeah, Kutaisi is twinned with the Welsh town of Newport. As a result, certain places in Kutaisi are named after the Welsh town or have Welsh or English names. This has also sped up the process of transliterating Georgian street names into Latin. Basically, there are no streets in Kutaisi that do not have the name written in the Latin script alongside the Georgian script, something which I missed dearly in Tbilisi. In short, Kutaisi is taking full advantage of its newfound opportunities that arose from the moving of the parliament here and the opening of the airport nearby. After over a century of irrelevance since the fall of the last Georgian kingdom and until earlier this decade, Kutaisi is now on its way to becoming great again. It won't happen overnight, but the progress is already visible, and in 5 or 10 years' time it will be even better. In fact, even in 2 years' time, after they finish all the construction sites that were open at the time for this video recording, it will already have made a tremendous amount of progress. And we'll watch that progress since, as I said, I'll probably come back to this town when the opportunity to visit Azerbaijan will present itself. Fun fact, when I started planning for this tour exactly 1 year ago, I first considered visiting Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, but the visa procedures for Azerbaijan are a nightmare, so instead I went with this version and included Budapest instead of Azerbaijan. Now that I mentioned visas, I should probably also say that getting into Georgia legally is fairly simple. You just need a valid passport. If you're from the Intermarium, you don't even need a passport, just a valid ID card. The maximum allowed for staying is 1 year without a visa. Visa-free regime also applies to North America, most of South America except Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Venezuela, Guyana and Suriname, who do need a visa, as well as Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Botswana and the South African Republic, which can also enter visa-free. Citizens of China, Mongolia, India, Argentina, most of Africa except the South African Republic and Botswana, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Kosovo and most of the Southeast Asia do require a visa. Some of them are eligible for a simple electronic visa, others will still have to do it the old-fashioned way. So with that said, after traveling on foot all over this town, Carl Augustsson of NCFM picked me up and took me to Tbilisi, which I'll show it all to you in all of its splendor in the next episode. But until then, thank you all for watching, thank you to all of those who donated to support this tour, thank you all for your continuous and generous support, and I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.